There are phone calls that change the direction of a life. Not the dramatic ones, not the calls that deliver news of death or disaster or the sudden reversal of fortune. The quiet ones. The calls that arrive in the middle of the night when a person is sitting alone with the weight of something they cannot put down, and the voice on the other end of the line is not there to solve anything but simply to be present in the specific darkness with the person who called. Matt Damon was 26 years old in the autumn of 1997. He had written a screenplay with his childhood friend Ben Affleck that had been bought by a major studio, developed into a film, and was now in the final stages of post-production. The film was called Good Will Hunting. It would go on to win Academy Awards and reshape both men's careers in ways that neither of them had fully anticipated when they were two kids from Cambridge, writing a script in their spare time, with the specific audacity of people who do not yet know what they are not supposed to be able to do. But in the autumn of 1997, in the weeks before the film's release, Matt Damon was not thinking about awards. He was thinking about the weight of what was coming. The specific weight that descends on a person who has made something from the most private available materials, and who is now watching that private material be prepared for public consumption on a scale they cannot fully imagine. He had made the film was almost out, and something in the proximity of the release had produced in him a quality of fear that was different from the fear of failure. The fear, subtler and harder to name, of having given something real and not yet knowing whether the world would receive it in the spirit in which it was given. This is the story of what Robin Williams did when he found out. Robin Williams had come to Good Will Hunting through the specific chain of connections that bring the right people to the right project at the right moment. He was cast as Sean Maguire, the therapist whose relationship with Will Hunting forms the emotional spine of the film. The adult who meets a damaged young genius and chooses, consistently and at personal cost, to be present with him rather than to manage him from a professional distance. It was a role Robin Williams understood from the inside. The question of what it means to be truly present with another person in their difficulty, to give them the attention that heals rather than the attention that performs healing, was not an abstract question for him. It was the question he had been living with across the full length of his career and his private life. He brought to Sean Maguire the quality of attention that he brought to hospital rooms in San Francisco and to garden benches in Marin County and to concrete steps outside sold-out shows. He brought it to the set. He brought it to the scenes. He brought it to the specific charged exchanges with a young Matt Damon, who was playing a version of himself so close to the actual version that the distance between the performance and the reality was sometimes nearly imperceptible. The two men developed, across the course of the production, the specific connection that forms between actors who are genuinely in scenes together, rather than beside each other in scenes. They talked between takes. They talked in the evenings sometimes. Robin watched Matt with the attention he brought to everyone, and what he saw in the younger man was something he recognized: extraordinary talent in the specific process of understanding its own weight. The film wrapped. Post-production began. The release date was set. And as the release approached, Matt Damon began to struggle in a way that was not about the work. The work was done. The work was good. It was about what came after the work. The specific exposure of having made something from the most personal available materials, and now being required to stand in front of it and let people see it and say things about it and decide what it meant. Robin Williams noticed. He noticed the way he always noticed, through the accumulation of small observations that resolved over time into a clear picture. He heard it in the quality of Matt's voice when the subject of the film came up. A particular tightening, a specific, managed quality that was not the young man's natural register. He recognized it, because he had felt it himself, many times. He called on a Tuesday night in late November 1997. Matt Damon has spoken about the phone call once, briefly, in public. In an interview conducted after Robin Williams' death in 2014, he was asked about Robin's influence on his career. He spoke about the film, about working with Robin Williams, about the specific quality of his presence on set. And then he said something that he did not elaborate on, that he allowed to stand without explanation. There was a phone call. Late at night. I do not think I would have gotten through what came next without it. He did not say what was in the call. He did not say how long it lasted. He let the sentence stand alone, as a fact, and moved on. The call lasted 2 hours. What was said in those 2 hours is private. It belongs to Matt Damon and to Robin Williams, and to the specific November night when it happened. This story does not claim to know the specific content. It claims only to understand the shape. The particular shape of a Robin Williams conversation, at its most serious, at its most genuinely giving, at its furthest remove from the public performance that the world associated with his name. Robin Williams would not have begun with comfort. He was not, in his private conversations, a man who moved quickly to reassurance. He had spent too many years watching reassurance function as a way of making the reassurer feel useful rather than actually helping the person being reassured. He had learned that genuine comfort began with genuine acknowledgement of what was actually there. So he would have begun with a question, something specific, something that opened the actual room, rather than asking for a catalog of its contents. Matt Damon would have answered. And once he began to answer, the specific quality of Robin Williams's listening would have created the conditions for the answer to go deeper than the surface. Because that was the thing about Robin Williams in these conversations. He waited. He waited for the answer that was actually there, not the answer that arrived first as a presentation of the difficulty. And what arrived, when the first presentational layer of Matt Damon's difficulty was acknowledged and set aside, was something more specific and more honest than the general fear of public exposure. It was the fear of the work itself being inadequate to what it was trying to do. Not the fear that critics would be unkind. The deeper fear that sits in the chest of anyone who has made something from the most private available materials, that the thing they made might not have captured what it was trying to capture. That the distance between the interior experience and the exterior artifact might be larger than the work could bridge. That what had felt, in the making of it, like the most honest thing they had ever done, might arrive in the world as something smaller or simpler or less true than what it had been inside. This fear does not respond to reassurance. The film is great does not touch it. People are going to love it does not reach it. It responds only to being understood. To someone acknowledging that the fear is legitimate, that the gap between the making and the receiving is real, and that the courage required to put something that personal into the world is not a small thing. Robin Williams understood this. He had crossed that gap many times himself. He had taken his most private emotional materials and turned them into performances that the world received as entertainment. He knew the cost. He knew the specific ache of watching something that came from the inside of you become something that existed on the outside, independent of your intentions, available to be misunderstood. He would have told Matt some version of this, not as a lecture, as a conversation between two people who had made things from private materials and were talking about what that was like, as the specific human connection of mutual recognition. You know this thing, I know this thing, we are in the same room with it. At some point during the 2 hours, Robin Williams made Matt Damon laugh. This is not speculation. Robin Williams always made people laugh, even in the most serious conversations. Not because he could not resist the comic impulse, but because laughter, at its best, is not the opposite of seriousness. It is seriousness finding its release valve. It is the tension of genuine emotional engagement, finding the specific angle from which the thing can be seen clearly enough to seem, for a moment, manageable. The laugh that Robin Williams produced in these moments was never the laugh of avoidance. It was the laugh of recognition. The laugh that says, yes, this is the absurd thing, and the absurdity does not diminish the real thing. It is simply the shape the real thing takes when you look at it from a certain angle. Matt Damon would have laughed, and the laugh would have been the release of something that had been building for weeks. And after the laugh, the thing that had been building would have been still there but different. Not smaller, but more possible to carry. Robin Williams said something near the end of the call that Matt Damon has not repeated publicly in its specifics, but has described in its effect. He has said that by the time the call ended, he felt able to face what was coming. Not because the fear was gone. Not because the gap between the private making and the public receiving had been closed. But because he had been in the presence of someone who understood the fear from the inside and had found a way to keep working anyway. Robin Williams had been doing this for 30 years. He had taken his private materials and made them public, again and again, at increasing scales of visibility, with the specific courage of someone who has decided that the work matters more than the safety of keeping it hidden. He could not give Matt Damon the certainty that the film would be received in the spirit in which it was made. Nobody could give that. But he could give him the knowledge that it was possible to survive the uncertainty. That the gap between making and receiving was survivable. That people who made things from private materials could offer those things to the world and remain themselves in the offering. That was what 2 Hours at Midnight in November 1997 contained. Good Will Hunting was released in December 1997. It became one of the most celebrated films of that year. Matt Damon and Ben Affleck won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. Robin Williams won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. The film was received largely and lastingly in the spirit in which it was made. Matt Damon stood on the stage at the Academy Awards in March 1998 and received the Oscar with a speech that was gracious and generous and visibly moved. He thanked the people he needed to thank. He did not mention the Tuesday night phone call. The call had done its work privately, in the way that the most important kinds of work are done. Robin Williams received his own Oscar the same night. It was the first of his career. His acceptance speech was brief and warm and funny, in the way he was always funny, when the emotion was real, using the humor not to deflect the emotion, but to hold it at the angle from which it was possible to express without collapsing. He thanked Gus Van Sant. He thanked Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. He said something about his daughter that made the audience laugh and then made them cry, which was the Robin Williams mode at its most characteristic. The two things not in opposition but in the same sentence, the laugh and the grief, sharing the same breath. He did not mention the Tuesday night phone call. It was not a public thing. It had happened in private, between two people, and its value was precisely in its privacy. In the fact that it was not a performance or a gesture, but simply a person calling another person at midnight because the other person needed someone to be on the phone with them. In the years after Good Will Hunting, Matt Damon built one of the most sustained and serious careers in American cinema. He made films that came from the same place that Good Will Hunting had come from. From genuine engagement with difficult material, from the willingness to be present in a scene without performing presence, from the specific courage of an actor who is not afraid to be seen. People have asked him, across the years since, what Robin Williams was like as a person. He has answered thoughtfully and specifically, and with genuine affection. He has talked about the set, about the quality of his attention, about what it was like to be in scenes with him. He has said the things that everyone who knew Robin Williams says when they are asked to describe what it was like to be in his presence. That he made you feel like the most interesting person in the room, that his attention was total and genuine and impossible to fake, that the off-camera version of him was, in some ways, more extraordinary than the on-camera version. But there is one thing he has said, in the interview conducted after Robin's death in 2014, that sits apart from the rest, that carries a different weight. That stands without elaboration. As facts sometimes stand when the person speaking them knows that the elaboration would diminish rather than add. There was a phone call, late at night. I do not think I would have gotten through what came next without it. That is the whole account. A phone call, late at night. 2 hours in November 1997. A 26-year-old man carrying the weight of the most personal thing he had ever made. A 46-year-old man who understood that weight from 30 years of carrying a version of it himself, and the specific gift that only the person who has been through it can give to the person who is going through it now. Not the reassurance that the fear is unfounded, but the knowledge that the fear is survivable. That people who make things from private materials can give those things to the world and remain themselves. That the gap between making and receiving is real but crossable. That you can stand on the other side of it, as Robin Williams had stood for 30 years, and still be who you were when you started. That was the midnight call. That was the gift. It was private when it happened. It remains private now. Its value was never in being known about. Its value was in the 2 hours it was, and in the career that continued after it, work made from private materials, offered to the world with care, continuing the thing that the phone call made possible. Robin Williams made Matt Damon laugh on the phone at midnight in November 1997. The film went out into the world. The world received it. And Matt Damon, on a stage in Los Angeles in March 1998, held an Academy Award for the screenplay he had written as a kid from Cambridge who did not know what he was not supposed to be able to do. He did not mention the phone call. He did not have to. Some gifts are complete in themselves. Some calls are enough. There is a particular quality to the fear that precedes the release of something deeply personal. It is distinct from stage fright, which is the fear of performance failure, the dropped line, the technical catastrophe, the moment when the mechanics of the work break down in front of an audience. Stage fright is a fear of the craft. What Matt Damon was carrying in the autumn of 1997 was something different. The fear of successful communication. The fear that the film would be received, would be understood, would reach people, and that in reaching them, the private materials from which it had been made would become permanently public, permanently outside his control, permanently available to be used and interpreted, and misread, and correctly read, and appropriated into other people's private experiences in ways that would bear little relationship to the intention with which they had been offered. This is the paradox at the center of making anything from private experience. The closer the work is to the actual interior life, the more successful its communication tends to be, because people recognize the texture of genuine experience, even when the specific circumstances are foreign to them. But this recognition comes at the cost of the privacy that made the work possible. The very intimacy that gives the work its power is the same intimacy that is exposed when the work goes out. Robin Williams had been living inside this paradox for 30 years, by the autumn of 1997. He had built a career, in part, on the willingness to take private materials, private pain, private loneliness, private love, and translate them into public forms that people could receive and recognize and carry forward. He had done this on stages, and in recording studios, and in film sets, and in the specific charged creative spaces where private experience becomes public art. He had also paid the price of it, the specific loneliness of a person who has given so much of himself in public that the private version of himself sometimes became difficult to locate. The particular exhaustion of sustained public creativity, the moments when the distance between the performing self and the private self seemed larger than was comfortable to contemplate. He knew what Matt Damon was carrying. He knew it from the inside, with the specific knowledge that comes from having been in the same place, at different scales and in different circumstances, but in the same fundamental position. A person who has made something from what they most privately are, and who must now watch it become something that belongs to everyone. He called because he could not call. Not because it was his responsibility, not because it was a professional obligation, not because anyone would have noticed or criticized him if he had not. He called because he was Robin Williams, which meant that noticing a person who needed something and then not doing anything about what he had noticed was not an available option. The noticing was the obligation. The action followed from the noticing as inevitably as one step follows another on a staircase. The 2 hours of the Tuesday night phone call contained several things that can be known from their effects, even when their specific content remains private. They contained acknowledgement, the specific acknowledgement of a person who has been through something naming what they went through to the person who is about to go through it. Not, "I know how you feel," which is always an approximation. Something more like, "I know this terrain. I have walked it. Here is what the walking was like." They contained honesty about the cost. Robin Williams was not, in private conversations, a man who minimized difficulty or prettified the experience of making private material public. He had been through enough, had paid enough costs, to know that the way through the difficulty was not around it. The acknowledgement had to be full, or it was useless. They contained, at some point, the specific Robin Williams mode of serious conversation. The moment when the absurdity of the situation became visible from an angle that allowed it to be briefly, genuinely funny. Not the deflection of laughter, not the performance of humor as a way of avoiding the hard thing, but the specific recognition that the hard thing, when looked at from exactly the right angle, contained an element of genuine comedy that did not diminish its hardness but made it more possible to hold. And they contained, at the end, the thing that Matt Damon has described without quoting, the statement or the conversation or the specific exchange that left him feeling able to face what was coming. What that was, in its specific words, is not this story's to tell. What it did, in its specific effects, is the story.